Hello, welcome back. I'm Catzilla, and this is where I talk about horror and all things horrifying to save my friends from my constant info dumping. So remember that one watch equals one free friend. Welcome back to my subgenre ranking of fear. Assuming if you're here, you've seen part 1. If you haven't and you want to, go watch that. That's subgenres 20 to 11. But also, if you just want to skip right to the top 10, go ahead. Also, it can be my completionist ass, but you do you. All you need to know is I'm going through the different subgenres of horror movies, so the different vibes, the different flavors, the different spooks going on out there, and ranking them in order of scariness, starting with the least scary and working our way up to the most scary. So today we will be getting to the number 1 scariest scary ever to scare. I am throwing in some like subgenres within the subgenres as well as I go, making sure I cover every little nook and cranny, giving you a nice full picture of each. So part 1 covered horror romance, exploitation, mondo, horror comedy, survival horror, animal attack, slasher, vampires, werewolves, and zombies. Before we resume, I'll remind you as always that fear is subjective. Whatever fills my smooth little brain with fear might not fill yours with anything. And that's okay. I find those differences really interesting. So do feel free to let me know where we differ, where we agree, anything you think I haven't covered that keeps you awake at night. But the only rule is you have to be nice to me while doing so. Be nice to me. Okay, let's get into it. Number 10 on my list is religious horror, but I should really say Christian horror, as it's Christianity, churches, crucifixes, all the type stuff. That's really what's dominating this subgenre by a long shot. That's not to say there aren't some absolutely sick religious horror movies out there centering on different organized religions. I haven't seen enough of them to give you a nice full rundown here. So do let me know if you have any recs. So I talked a lot in the last part about my pain and suffering when ranking like subgenres I really enjoy quite low, because they're not the scariest per se. You know, they don't scare me, I just like them. But this entry is kind of the reverse situation of that. I'm not a huge fan of religious horror movies. I never really reach for them, bar a few classics. But I do think it is very easy to make stories within that setting very dark and unnerving. I went to Catholic school. I know a thing or two about Christian horrors.
I don't know how I missed out this very key part of my script, but I'm talking about nuns here.
Someone whose whole existence is dedicated to being obedient and good makes a great candidate for a horror villain, because, you know, kind of taking something that is reliably safe and making it into something unpredictably evil is kind of what the genre is all about. It's happened to mothers, soon-to-be mothers, grandmothers, little children, and yeah, nuns. They're also invited to the party. I think the nun attire can easily be played with by a horror director too. They wear traditionally dark black clothes, and the wimple and veil covering their face a little bit can kind of be given Sadako from The Ring type qualities. The scary nun movie niche is loosely kind of known as nunsploitation. And that's something that became really popular in European, mostly Italian movies in the 1970s. These all centered on nuns going nuts, whether that be just mentally snapping and becoming murderous and cruel, or actually becoming, you know, possessed by the demons and the devil that they devote their whole lives to warding off. For example, Giulio Barutti's 1979 Killer Nun, or Sua Omicidi, about a nun, Sister Gertrude, who is kind of spiraling into a nervous breakdown and starts abusing morphine and heroin after having had surgery to remove a brain tumor. Grisly murders start occurring at her convent, bodies are turning up ritualistically slashed and bound and chucked out of windows, but due to the aforementioned nervous breakdown and drug-induced fugue states, Gertrude can't be sure that she's not the killer behind them all. That's all I'll say about that. I'll also just note that lesbianism was a really big thing in these nunsploitation movies. These queens were having so much lesbian intercourse with each other. Obviously back then that was still very much seen as like a sexual perversion, so it fit into the whole like nuns gone off the rails narrative. And also, you know, male directors are gonna male direct. Movies like The School of the Holy Beast, 1974, about a young woman who joins a convent to find out what happened to her mother who died there, and Dark Habits, 1993, about a cabaret singer who becomes a nun to try and restart her life after her boyfriend ODs. Both propose, as many nunsploitation movies do, what if you went to a convent and all the nuns were lesbians and were insane and tortured you horrifically? Honestly, valid fear. Demonically possessed, supernatural evil nuns are a big thing in the subgenre, as I mentioned. Usually they will follow like a nun who's kind of naughty to start with, who then gets like tempted by the devil himself and goes kind of beast mode. The Mexican movie Satanico Pandemonium, 1975, has that exact thing happen to its lead, Sister Maria. Gore maestro Lucio Fulci did Demonia, 1990, and that has a bunch of nuns who are crucified in the 1400s after having been accused of satanic, witchy, generally un-nun-like activities, and whose spirits come back in present day to kill people and fuck shit up. Nowadays, nunsploitation and scary nuns are alive and well as a horror convention, namely in the Conjuring movies, or more specifically the Nun movies. The Nun movies are incredibly bad in my opinion. I think they are boring as hell, and considering that the character is so iconic and popular, they really do nothing particularly intriguing with her. I do think though that the character is creepy and could be like super creepy if someone smarter was involved. I remember seeing her jumping out of her painting in The Conjuring 2 at the high school sleepover and my timbers being absolutely shivered, but I don't think she's ever as menacing in any other nun media as she is in her little B-plot appearances there. We also have lots of horror movies about nuns where they themselves are not monsters, but they're like convent, and general nunnishness definitely adds to the spooky vibes at play. Part of being a nun is living a very simple life with only the bare necessities that you need. So that, like, right off the bat can create quite a bleak and gothic atmosphere. First Omen, 2024, prequel to the iconic 70s Omen movie, and Immaculate, 2024, both of those are about good, unscary nuns discovering dark, devilish secrets of the church. I've actually hated both of those movies, I'm so sorry. But you guys might like them, a lot of people did, especially if you're into like sort of traditional like Antichrist, devil stories. Of course though, Christian horror doesn't just have nuns to play with as like a scary element. Christian beliefs are very old and often ritualistic. The scriptures are often quite like morbid and freaky, and it can't be understated. Christianity has been used to hurt a lot of people over history, a lot of people. So much of it is ripe for some horror maxing. Midnight Mass, for example, Mike Flanagan's Netflix series that is more than a little bit inspired by Stephen King Salem's Lot. That uses vampires to point out the flaws in Christianity in a very interesting way. It says a lot about the blind faith involved in organized religion, showing how the Christian townspeople are able to view clearly terrifying and evil things slash beings as miracles and angels if they're told it's holy. That is quintessential religious horror, with its use of lots of hymns, its atmospheric, creepy background music, and many of its scariest scenes taking place in church during services. A movie I truly adore is Saint Maud, 2019. That is just a very eerie, hopeless tale about a mentally fragile religious zealot, Maud, who works as a carer for a lady with terminal cancer. Part of the story is she believes she often gets messages from God, although they're less messages per se and more just orgasm. It's shown way less goofy than that sounds. The shots of her like communicating with God and feeling it overwhelm her whole body are so unnerving and strange. Maud believes more and more throughout the movie that she has some kind of godly work to do on earth, and that she herself is a saint-like being, Saint Maud. What would a Christian saint be without a little self-flagellation, you may ask? And this movie answers with some absolutely nauseating scenes I think about regularly of Maud walking around with nails in her shoes just for funsies. Yeah, lots of religious horror fun to be had in this movie as Maud tries to save the people around her souls, and there's a super spine-chilling scene featuring the voice of Jesus. The Lodge takes a somewhat similar approach, wherein the lead is a woman who escaped a religious suicide cult and is now medicated and living a normal life as a new stepmom. However, when she wakes up one morning while holidaying with her stepkids in a lodge to heavy snow and all her belongings, including her meds, gone, needless to say, those old Christian ideologies come back to haunt her in a very distressing way. I think the reverse of that trope, like incredibly spiritual person going kind of crazy with their beliefs plus possible supernatural ongoings, the opposite of that would be Stigmata 1999. That gives seemingly Christly powers to an absolute randomer, an atheist hairdresser from Pennsylvania. She starts to experience stigmata, a phenomenon reported throughout history by Catholics, where people mystically develop the same wounds as Jesus got on the cross. So hands, wrists, feet, and chest and head. There's mostly accounts of it happening to old-timey saints like Saint Francis of Assisi and Saint Catherine of Siena, and most importantly of all in this movie, Patricia Arquette. The movie also goes down a possession story sort of route, and it draws on classic religious horror tropes like goings on at the Vatican and mysterious lost portions of the Bible and stuff. There are far too many movies about the Christian practice of exorcism for me to even count, and I really don't care about them. The Exorcist was enough for me. None of these wannabes could ever hope to be her. Exorcisms in real life throughout history are so fucking exploitative as well. Usually just subjecting ill people or like troubled teenagers to basically torture under the pretense a demon is inside of them. So any of that shit that like proclaims to be based on a true story, instantly PMO. Like the exorcism of Emily Rose, for example, foul. It's a trial against the Catholic priest who killed a girl during an exorcism. He argues that she was possessed by a demon, so he had to, while the prosecutor argues that she was literally just epileptic and schizophrenic. And guess which one the movie wants you to believe? It's based on the real-life Annalise Michael case too, a girl who was killed during an exorcism when she was actually just epileptic and bipolar. It makes me so angry. I cannot. One of the only modern exorcism movies I do enjoy is the Spanish movie Veronica. It's very cut and dry. Girl is possessed after playing with a Ouija board, but it manages to be incredibly scary to me. It has some really freaky hallucinations from the possessed Veronica, where like her little siblings are eating her, for example, and there's these big black moldy stains on their house's floorboards and mattresses and stuff. I don't know, that one just has a nice little edge to it. I find it very effectively creepy. Spoiler, huge spoiler incoming, okay? Huge spoiler. You ready? It does not have a happy ending, which is awesome to see. I love that. Jesus does not save the day for once. So I guess atheist win is when a teenage girl dies. Spot number 9, it goes to dark fantasy. This one is a really interesting one because dark fantasy as a title can be referring to so many different things, and here I'm kind of talking about all of them. Just straight fantasy is obviously a genre steeped in whimsy and childhood and adventure and fairies, you know, it's very light and breezy. And dark fantasy kind of takes all of that and makes it into something sinister and dangerous, which right off the bat can just make for some really unnerving stories. I think it's a really interesting way as well of deconstructing what horror really is. You look at a lot of those like old classic fairy tales that we grew up with and realize that just on their own they really are fucking terrifying a lot of the time. Movies like The Ugly Stepsister, for example, do that really fantastically. It takes that implicit darkness that's already there in the classic fairy tale of Cinderella, or more specifically Aschenputtel, the 19th century Brothers Grimm story, and it makes it explicit. It turns it up to 11. Although Cinderella is a tale about a princess and her fairy godmother and the true love that gives her a happily ever after with her prince, it's also pretty bleak, with Cinderella's really abusive and sad home life and terrible relationship with her stepsisters. It also originally featured one of the ugly stepsisters hacking off parts of her feet to fit them into Cinderella's golden slipper, and the both of them being blinded by doves dive bombing into their eyes as a punishment for their bitchiness. Emily Blichfeld's The Ugly Stepsister definitely amplifies that kind of tone, shifting the perspective from Cinderella to one of the ugly stepsisters, Elvira, and it shows her battling to be beautiful and win the prince's affection as an all-out body horror gore fest. The aforementioned toe chopping scene is indeed included. It's drawn out and very realistic and just awful, and it's happening in stages because she keeps passing out, as well as tapeworm swallowing, nose hammering, and the 19th century version of lash extensions. Yeah, I honestly wouldn't lead with dark fantasy when recommending this to someone because that is a little misleading. It really is, its main gig is the revolting body horror. Like, this is not like just a little whisper of dark fantasy. It's intense. The director said it's completely inspired by David Cronenberg's works and Julia Ducournau's movie Raw. But of course that horrified fantasy setup sets the backdrop for everything in such a unique and cool way. Oz Perkins' adaptation of Hansel and Gretel does a similar thing. It takes the darkness already present in the Brothers Grimm tale, again, Hansel and Gretel, and makes it explicit, really amplifies it. That's a really easy story to make into a dark fantasy horror film because it really always was so scary. I am pretty publicly not a fan of Oz Perkins' work. I think he has an extraordinary talent for just missing the mark. The Hansel and Gretel film, like all of Perkins' films in my opinion, is visually incredibly beautiful and sets up this really heavy, eerie atmosphere, but doesn't entirely know what the fuck it's doing beyond that. Doesn't, you know, it doesn't totally stick the landing. However, I will say that this is his strongest movie to me. This is the one that comes the closest to working for me. I think the witch Holder in this movie is so perfectly menacing with her pitch black fingertips and luring shape-shifting abilities. The 1985 Company of Wolves movie, this is one of my staple Catzilla mentions that I bring up in every video. I need to like start making a drinking game of all the movies that I always mention in my videos so you guys can get crunk while you stream. That movie is a take on Little Red Riding Hood, the story of a little girl going to visit her grandmother but getting tricked by the big bad wolf. That movie is peak dark fantasy. I absolutely would sell it to someone that way. It says, "I see your big bad wolf and I raise you big bad werewolf." Hence why I already talked about it a little bit in the werewolves category last video. Yeah, in spite of all its cozy storybook whimsy, it has some super nasty practical effects and body horror, as to be expected with any 80s werewolves. The mid-transformation bloody flesh dogs are horrifying to look at. I do love, however, that for the final werewolf form, they just use dogs. Like, that's actually extremely cute. Walter Murch's Return to Oz, 1985, doesn't flip any Brothers Grimm fairy tales on its head, but rather takes the story of the Wizard of Oz, mainly using the lore from Frank Baum's original Oz novels than the 30s, like Judy Garland adaptation, although it is an unofficial sequel to that film. Wizard of Oz is a sweet, magical little movie about a girl, Dorothy, and her adventure through the fantasy land of Oz to find said Wizard of. It's got lovable little sidekick characters like the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man, and the original movie looks gorgeous with its use of Technicolor. It really does look and feel like a kid's beautiful dream. The only kind of tinge of darkness already there with The Wizard of Oz is all the like crazy things that happen during its production. It's often one of the ones considered to be like a cursed film set, and has a lot of urban legends surrounding. You guys have all seen the scary posts of the dead munchkin that you can see in the back of some shots. I know you have. But anyhow, Return to Oz 1985 just goes as dark as humanly possible with that same material. We see how Dorothy is sent to a psychiatric facility right after the events of the first film and given electroshock therapy because her beautiful Ozian journey is just seen by everyone around her as some kind of psychosis, some kind of vivid delusion she's having. She does manage to get back to Oz, but finds it completely destroyed and miserable, overtaken by the evil King Gnome and Princess Mombi, and all her little buddies there have been turned to stone. Needless to say, it's got a much sadder, stranger tone than the first. There feels like a real threat there, and it's very uncanny looking. Dark fantasy movies can create their own fantastical lore, however. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't always need any other fantasy IP. There's excellent dark fantasy movies out there that really feel like they're their own like ancient folk tales, like Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, for example. That takes that quintessential fantasy structure of regular sad little girl gets whisked away into a magical realm and must undergo some kind of quest there with the promise of a better, more exciting life. And it honestly just gets really freaky and unnerving with it from there. Lead Ophelia discovers she's actually a princess in the underworld, and she must complete 3 mystical, often very frightening tasks to return to her kingdom. One of them involves the child-eating pale man, who I feel is a very iconically terrifying character from this movie, with his huge, grotesque appearance and his eyes in the little slits on the palm of his hands. I think a lot of people have not so fond memories of watching this as kids in 2006 and just being so scarred by it. The same absolutely goes for The Dark Crystal, 1982, another thrilling quest dark fantasy movie with freaky looking puppets and animatronics to die for, made by the legendary Jim Henson, of course. The main source of darkness there comes from the movie's antagonist, the Skeksis monsters, who our main characters are out to defeat. They're these dragon, bird, crocodile, slightly rotting overlords. There's also many less explicitly evil but equally nasty looking puppets in The Dark Crystal, like the Land Striders, who are kind of used like noble steeds to ride on. Just all round a very uncanny valley type of movie. The last dark fantasy niche I want to talk about is something I'm gonna call children's horror. Children's media that's just a little bit off kilter, just a little bit terrifying, is a concept that permeates a lot of horror. It's why we have so many horror movies about clowns and dolls, and why we now have a load of analog horror about like evil lost episodes of SpongeBob and twisted children's TV shows that only air in the dead of night. Stuff we watch when we're young that like creeps us out and shocks us in a way we're not expecting, we're not used to, really rewires our brains in a big way. And I'm sure a lot of people had that experience with, at least people of my generation had that experience with Henry Selick's Coraline. That has a little girl who finds a tunnel to an alternate dimension in her family's new apartment, where she discovers doppelgangers of her parents and neighbors and such, referred to as Other Mother and Other Father, for example. And the only differences are they have buttons sewn into their eyeballs. Cute. It all seems to be perfect to Coraline, albeit deeply unsettling and off to the viewer, and she is told she can live there forever if she'd only sew buttons into her own eyes too. That's all she has to do. This freaks her the hell out, and things all become more and more overtly horrific from there. This movie even feels like Lovecraftian at points, like really, really existential shit, with concepts of being trapped for all eternity and the world and reality and time all decaying and unraveling, and yeah, truly such a disturbing and overwhelming ride for its like 8 to 12-year-old target audience. It's also stop motion, which I feel like is the ultimate hallmark for these unsettling children's movies. Just makes everything that bit jankier while still looking like cartoony and kiddie at first glance. Many other films around the early 10s followed in its footsteps with that. For example, Paranorman, about a little boy who can see ghosts and the ancient witch's curse on his town he's trying to break. And Frankenweenie, Tim Burton's take on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but tweaked to be a supposedly more light-hearted kids movie where a science whiz boy resurrects his beloved pet dog with lightning. That one having such an emphasis on dog death was just an immediate cause of distress for little me. In fact, I have no shame admitting that all of those movies really creep me out. The Caroline, Frankenweenie, and Paranorman, they all scare the fuck out of me. Spot number 8 goes to clowns. Everybody loves a clown. I can't say clown without hearing the Losers Club in It Chapter 2 saying clown, clown, clown. This is a really interesting horror subgenre because it very much is one, you know, you see them on Halloween decorations and haunted house attractions. I've been chased by many a chainsaw wielding clown on one of those. Clowns themselves are not obviously intrinsically frightening per se, you know, not like a ghost or a zombie, which is immediately scary because it's like dead. Like clowns are just clowns. They're meant to entertain people and they're like made for kids. They're performers. I just yapped at you for a hot minute about how things that are kid friendly can often very easily be made very scary with just a few simple steps. But I do actually think there's a lot more at play psychologically when it comes to why collectively we are so scared of clowns and why they blend so well and so seamlessly into a horror setting. A face that is covered in very exaggerated, very obscuring makeup definitely plays into those human fears of not being able to predict a person, not really being able to suss them out, and therefore not being able to trust them. There's also something quite corpse-like and almost body horror-ish about the makeup and costuming. Like you're looking at someone who's bleeding or kind of mutilated in some way. For someone making a horror movie, that is a very striking villain look to play with right off the bat. And then I think real life evil clowns like John Wayne Gacy, serial killer and pedophile, who also worked as a clown at parties and charity events, and who would often distract his victims with little magic tricks and clowning routine bits. That went a huge long way for solidifying clowns as predatory figures in pop culture. I read something really interesting once, and I cannot remember who, what, where, when for the life of me, unfortunately, but how fear of clowns like could possibly go back to our unfortunately very societally ingrained fear of effeminate men. Like clowns are essentially almost drag queens, you know? They are dudes jumping around in extravagant makeup, embodying some gender performance that we can't understand. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say in maybe some ways our fear has evolved from that. And John Wayne Gacy specifically really set in stone the kind of stereotype of the predatory gay guy. All of his victims were young boys specifically, so it all comes kind of full circle. That is not me saying it's somehow homophobic to be scared of clowns. I'm talking more about the societal evolution of the fear, the teeny tiny little unconscious influences and how they've played into that fear and made it so that clowns are portrayed the way they are in horror. It is not homophobic to be afraid of Pennywise. Maybe it is. Yeah, it is actually. And so that leads me to the most famous, most impactful evil clown media of all time, Stephen King's It. Now, you may have been able to suss out from some of my decor and some little details I drop here and there that it is rather important to me. And the truth is, that would be a huge understatement. A novel and its movies got me into Stephen King, my favorite author of all time. Who would have guessed? And it also informed so much of my tastes, so much of my personality, even my soul. It all goes back to it for me. And it's one of those things that I like to a point where like it's almost too sacred for me to talk about. Sometimes it's hard for me to talk about it because it feels like offering my heart up on a platter, you know? It's very precious. But here is me in all my it head glory, okay? Here is my very faded and blown out Kneeball House tattoo. Stephen King's horror epic follows the small Maine town of Derry and the terrifying clowny curse on it, wherein Pennywise the evil clown, asterisk, reemerges every 27 years to terrorize the children of Derry and feed on them, kind of feed on their fear. We mainly focus on this through the eyes of 7 weird little dweebs, they call themselves the Losers Club, who fall victim to Pennywise's reign of terror and band together to try and fight back. Now, the reason I say clown asterisk is because Pennywise is technically not a human man at all. He's a kind of cosmic space entity called a glamour that, in order to do the aforementioned scaring and killing, can shapeshift into whatever scares his victims most. So, you know, in the 90s adaptation, which is set in the 50s and 80s at different points, it appears as many different classic Universal monsters, or like at least creatures inspired by them, like the teenage werewolf, the mummy, etc. He can appear in slightly more abstract ways though, especially in the newer adaptations. He appears as like the character of Beverly's sexually abusive father, or as Bill's dead little brother Georgie like a gazillion times, and Bill falls for it every fucking time. Every fucking time. He's like, well maybe that is my year's dead brother in the storm drain. I don't know. That being said, Pennywise's main, most recognizable default form is Pennywise the clown. When the losers find old photos of him throughout history, for example, he always appears as a clown. That's really kind of his main look. I think it's clear to see Tim Curry's 1990 portrayal of him as vastly more interesting. It's so stark and simple and clearly looks like a dude in face paint, but the unassummingness of that just makes it all the more menacing. He really does just look so automatically out of place in this cozy New England town he inhabits. And he did indeed terrify me horrifically as a child. The primary colors of his fit are so jarring and childlike. The newer Pennywise look is kind of dog shit a little bit. I think he looks much more like an evil clown, if that makes sense. It's too much of a self-aware portrayal. His suit looks dirtier, much older, a kind of Victorian type of thing. And he's got that unnaturally massive 5 head, of course. I do think any chance this costume could have had to be cool is really shat all over by the excessive CGI Bill Skarsgård has plastered in. You know, making him do that fucking jerky leap run every 5 seconds and unhinge his jaw and glow out of the eyes and stuff. Although I will say, I do think 2017, it never feels human. He has the opposite of Tim Curry's like creepy bloke in a suit vibe, which in fairness does hint at its extraterrestrial origins, so there's that. In all adaptations, he's accompanied with clowny circus music and his iconic red balloons. Yeah, this is utterly the blueprint. The release of It 1990 actually saw a huge rise in coulrophobia, fear of clowns, and I think it's safe to say ever since then evil clowns have very much solidified themselves in the pop culture sphere. Heavy hitter in the scary clown department today is Terrifier, that whole series. Those are very much splatter movies, gore fests, similar to the kind of bloody comedies I talked about in part 1 with like Brain Dead and Toxic Avenger. They follow Art the Clown, an absolute menace with increasingly supernatural powers, who goes around torturing and chopping for pure funsies. They're all very disgusting and incredibly camp, and they certainly have a teensy little baby misogyny problem, especially in the earlier entries. I think that Art is probably the most visually frightening clown out there right now. He's got a somewhat stripped back appearance in that it's completely colorless, he's bald, it's very much a Pierrot type look. Damien Leone, the creator of the franchise, specifically set out to make him the reverse of Pennywise in every way, because he really wanted a distinct iconic clown for this generation, not like any that came before. Art also doesn't speak, but he is extremely expressive. He's constantly miming and honking his little horn in a very exaggerated way. It really plays into that psychology I was talking about, where like you can't quite predict a clown. All his uncanny, bouncy shtick paired with everything else about him is just so malevolent. Art is also probably the most relentlessly violent of evil clowns I can think of off the top of my head. If you go up against him, Lord fucking help you. You will never experience anything but extreme suffering and or death ever again. The only other evil clowns today I can think of that come close to rivaling him are the Hell House clowns. I especially like them in the first Hell House movie, as you never see these creepy motherfuckers explicitly move. We just cut back to them having occasionally changed position off camera. It's really giving, man, we don't own a clown statue. He's not specifically a clown per se, but he is so clown adjacent that I feel entitled to mention him. Pretzel Jack from season 4 of the horror show Channel Zero is so fucking terrifying to me. He looks revolting, and his lore is that he's a child's imaginary friend drawing come to life, which he is certainly delivering on. He's kind of a contortionist, mimey type of ghoul. In the show, you always get like kind of a sense of when he might be about to appear in a scene before he does, and the dread I get awaiting him popping up is nasty.
Honestly, I don't know how I forgot to mention killer clowns from outer space in this section, and honestly, I deserve to be imprisoned for that. But yeah, killer clowns are definitely some iconic killer clowns. I think I probably forgot it because they're not meant to be super scary. It's very much a silly, campy comedy, but they did definitely frighten me when I was little and would see like ads for it, like playing a rerun on the film channel. But that was mostly because it sent my mind back to Pennywise.
As always with kind of creature features, for every regular evil clown movie, there is an evil clown POV movie where we get to spend time with our main clown rather than his victims. We're seeing through his eyes, you know, they're telling his story, breaking his silence. By far the best of these I can think of right off the bat is Clown 2014. Great fucking title, I know, but I saw that right when it came out, and it did indeed unsettle me tremendously. I think that's because it introduces a bit of body horror to the evil clown narrative. It follows a regular guy who finds an old clown suit in his basement and puts it on to entertain at his little boy's birthday party. Alas, he mysteriously can never really get the suit off again. It starts to fuse to his body. him frantically trying to yank the clown nose off before work the next day and like ripping half the skin on his actual nose off in the process is something I think about often, actually. As well as never being able to de-clown, he starts to get murderous urges and insatiable hunger, slowly transforming into an evil clown entity like Pennywise or Art against his will. And we found out this is because the suit was actually cursed by an ancient Icelandic demon called the Cloyne, which, okay, is actually really funny. But this film is pretty damn terrifying, and I actually found it to be quite a tough watch. It's a really bleak take. Other films that are from our clowns POV usually take on a bit of a lighter tone, like for example Stitches 2012, which follows the undead clown Stitches. He was killed by horrible little children at a birthday party who were unimpressed with his clowning act, and he's back for bloody revenge. He's played by stand-up comedian Ross Noble, and the character is indeed very comedic, very foul-mouthed and silly. Funland 1987 is another movie about a clown getting revenge, with many goofy hijinks along the way, but this time he's killing the fun fair workers that fired him. Honestly, I cannot believe I came away from researching this with this belief, but I think we need more just traditional scary clown stories. I think we need some super fucking scary ones for this generation, you know? I saw like the Clown in a Cornfield adaptation that came out recently. I've never read the book, but it sounded bad and the movie was bad. Very bland clown content. That was not enough. I need more. I need a really, really scary... I know we have Terrify, but I want more. I would like some more, please. Number 7 goes to a subgenre I am so heavily obsessed with right now, which is witches. Reading Hex by Thomas Oldhoyvelt is pretty much entirely responsible for this. Ever since I finished it, it's like my little ears prick up every time I hear something related to terrifying horror witches. A witch is a character that can be interpreted so differently, as long as they meet the basic criteria of like woman who has mystical, most often malevolent powers. Beyond that, these bitches can kind of look and act however a filmmaker really wants them to. They're traditionally depicted as decrepit, super old ladies, you know, the root of all evil, super old ladies. So you've got your fair bit of hagsploitation present in these movies. That's the term for horror stories about aging women, often looking at totally normal parts of aging, such as mental deterioration and wrinkles, sagging skin, looking at all of that through a scary, grotesque lens. I think the reason we often see witches depicted this way is because a very common witch ability is immortality, or living an unnaturally long life, or just kind of being ancient, being an ancient soul. That's actually my favorite kind of little niche of the witch subgenre, which is undead witches, or witches who died centuries ago but are still kind of able to interact with this realm, this earth, whether it be through spirit form or just via their long-lasting unbreakable curses they cast all those years ago. You know, think the Blair Witch Project. In my opinion, one of the most terrifying movies of all time. No slander tolerated here. That follows a group of film students making a documentary about the legend of the Blair Witch in Burkittsville, Maryland, and the supposedly cursed forest she inhabits there. The Blair Witch is a woman who was banished after being suspected of witchcraft back in the 1700s, and her spirit and curse live on, causing bizarre murders and disappearances over the centuries, once appearing to a child as an old woman whose feet never touch the ground, for example. Over the film, she just kind of mystically fucks with the film students camping out in the forest, leaving them cans and bundles of twigs and odd kind of sigil-like formations outside their tents, and tormenting them with familiar sounding cries all night. Spoiler alert, the Blair Witch spoiler, but the students, they pretty much are all trapped in the forest eventually under her spell, and all kind of end up losing their minds a little bit. Well, a lot of bit. They go crazy. Witches and their curses living on out of rage after having been tried for witchcraft is a very popular trope in this subgenre. H.P. Lovecraft's 1933 short story Dreams in the Witch House is a great example of this, especially the adaptation of it by Guillermo del Toro in his absolute banger series, Cabinet of Curiosities. Brilliantly bizarre and existential, as one would expect from a Lovecraft tale. It follows a man who rents an attic room in the legendary witch house, apparently once the home of a 1700s witch whose specific area of witchy expertise laid with traveling between different dimensions at will. Features a lot of dizzying dream sequences. That's where the witch kind of communicates with the man, showing him talking rats with human faces and hideous hag creatures. Autopsy of Jane Doe is another one where, spoiler, two coroners doing an autopsy on a Jane Doe discover little by little that she is a witch from the 1600s and is most certainly not nearly as dead as she seems. She's covered in bizarre and extreme injuries from those attempting to witch hunt her over the years, like completely shattered ankles and wrists, her tongue cut out, lungs completely blackened as though she was in a horrible fire despite her skin being untouched. She has little sigils written on the underside of her skin as well, like inside of her, and mysterious phenomena keeps occurring around her seemingly lifeless body, like the radio switching on and hallucinations for the coroners and light bulbs exploding, all your classic spooky activities. I also absolutely love the French TV show Marianne. Again, one of the most terrifying pieces of media out there, in my opinion. It's about a horror author, Emma, who's made her career off of writing about the subject of her recurring nightmares as a kid, an undead 1600s witch named Maria. It turns out that Marianne is indeed real and needs Emma to keep writing about her to maintain her strength. This witch also often possesses people, namely a resident of Emma's hometown, Mrs. Daugeron, whose performance is blood-curdling, to be honest with you. The actress's expressions are just beyond. They're so awesome and so creepy. Like, please get those eyes the fuck away from me. Some undead witch movies I would consider classics are the Russian movie V, for example, with the just instantly dread-inducing concept of a guy accidentally causing a witch's death and having to be locked in with her corpse for 3 nights as part of a kind of standing vigil ritual. Of course, an undead witch is not a very fun sleepover host, and he is subjected to various horrors and terrifying sights for the duration. Surreal horror maestro Dario Argento also tried his hand at this niche with Inferno 1980, about a woman, Rose, who lives in a New York apartment once inhabited by one of the 3 mothers, a dark ancient trio of witches, and her brother investigating this after Rose's subsequent suspicious disappearance. Inferno is actually one of a trio of witchy horror movies from Argento, one of which obviously being the iconic Suspiria. This movie kind of marks our entry into the other witch horror niche, which doesn't focus on any ancient witch's curse from back in the Salem witch trials or anything, but rather focuses on very much alive witches walking among us and causing trouble with their spells in a very active way. You're much more likely to see their face and encounter them as a character in their own right, as opposed to just kind of hear their whispers on the breeze or feel their wrath from centuries ago. I think this is definitely a less menacing take on horror witches, but these divas still can do quite a lot of damage. Suspiria 1977, for example, sees the modern day coven of witches devoted to the 3 mothers and all the dark satanic shit they get up to as part of that, namely coven members who are running a prestigious girls dance school. The smash hit movie of the summer, the song of the summer, is Zach Cregger's Weapons, and that is a movie I'm about to spoil in a very big way. It's definitely one I recommend going in blind to if that's still possible. You know, I really don't think you should have this one spoiled if you can avoid it, so do skip ahead if you haven't seen it. That's got a brilliantly frightening witch performance by Amy Madigan playing Gladys. Even though she is just a sick old lady who practices her evil witchcrafts, she has this utterly malevolent energy radiating off of her. She really feels like some kind of demonic presence. Rather than just waving her hands around or willing it with her mind, we see Gladys use some old school practical witchcraft techniques with her little tree and its branches that she wraps people's hair around to control them, make them run around like me, age 7, on the playground. The Macedonian movie You Won't Be Alone, about a young shape-shifting witch who is abandoned by her caretaker and must learn about getting along in this world as a witch. And Hellbender, about a metalhead mother-daughter duo of kind of witch demon hybrids living their solitary little existence in the woods. Those take an almost kind of coming of age approach to the horrors of witchery, which I think is nice. It's a great allegory for women's growing up, especially when you look at how historically most witches were just women who were troubled or didn't fit the mold. Next up is sci-fi horror, which is such a broad genre in comparison to the others I just recapped. Alas, sci-fi horror is very good, very popular, and very fucking scary, especially nowadays when we're kind of living in a sci-fi horror. That's definitely a whole niche in itself. You know, the anxieties about scientific advancements in our daily lives and the science and tech we've come to live alongside and rely on going too far in some way. Shows like Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror, that its whole shtick is just kind of tech gone too far. Every episode of that is just a what if based on some dystopian technological gadget. Be it a society where everyone has to give everyone they meet a personal little Yelp review and display their own rating everywhere they go, or one where you can upload yourself to a VR cloud after you die and live in a weird little digital wonderland forever. Black Mirror's got it all. My personal favorite is USS Callister because Star Trek. Need I say more? Director Brandon Cronenberg's body of work also heavily deals with super futuristic, scary tech and the kind of sociological craziness that inspires people to use it. Possessor 2020, for example, sees a high-class assassin that uses this brain implant chip technology to possess other people when doing her hits so that she can get closer easier to her very high profile targets and cover it up better and stuff. It's not all smooth sailing, however, as all her assumed identities start kind of blending and she struggles to separate her home and work life in a big way. Infinity Pool 2023 sees an American tourist that accidentally hit somebody with his car while on holiday in the fictional country of Lee Tolka, wherein this is a crime punishable by death. However, Lee Tolka has a system going on where you can pay lots and lots and lots of money to have yourself cloned and have the clone killed in your place, as long as you watch said killing. Yeah, obviously things get weird as fuck from there on. Honestly, I don't mind Brandon Cronenberg in general. I'm a big David head, but it's always broken my heart that those two movies specifically, I just really don't like him. I've tried to watch them both multiple times. Not for me, does not pass the Catzilla bar. Much older and broader than the tech gone wrong subgenre though is the science gone too far. You know, these are your mad scientist movies where mere humans meddle with forces far too big for them to meddle with. This massively took off in 1950s sci-fi horror, what with science advancing the way it was at that time. You had the space race and UFO sightings and the government gatekeeping top secret information from the public all becoming really popular ideas, little cultural fascinations. The Hays Code, which was censorship regulations introduced during the golden age of cinema, with especially strict rules about displaying unchristian things in movies. That was growing much less of a big deal around that time. A lot of filmmakers were just kind of starting to ignore it. And so stories about men playing God with immoral science experiments became a big deal. Of course, none ever so well as the OG Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was adapted to screen in 1931. It's about a man, Dr. Frankenstein, who seeks to cure death, and so sews a bunch of dead body parts together and reanimates them, gives a whole new creature life. Only when it works, he's overcome with regret as he considers his creature to be a monster, and said monster is now out to get him. The Doctor has the line, "Now I know what it feels like to be God."
Now I know what it feels like to be God.
In reference to his horrific scientific breakthrough, but it used to be cut out due to said Hays Code. Bringing the dead back to life is the bread and butter of science gone wrong horror movies. For example, Reanimator 1985, another Lovecraft adaptation, all about the questionable scientist Herbert West and his all-coveted bright green reanimating serum and all the wannabe bitches that want to try and steal it off him. Flatliners 1990 is another really fun one I love, about a group of med students that want to try and prove life after death. So take it in turns flatlining and resuscitating each other so they can experience firsthand what you see when you're clinically dead. However, everyone who flatlines starts experiencing frightening supernatural hallucinations, mostly pertaining to their darkest secrets in life, their worst, most fatal mistakes coming back to haunt them. Lastly, where would the sci-fi horror heads of the world be without extraterrestrials, aliens, little green men? This is another niche that did numbers in the 50s, with movies like The Blob 1958, Invasion of the Body Snatchers 1956, The Thing from Another World 1951 coming out, and then it popped off again in the 70s and 80s with movies like The Blob 1988, Invasion of the Body Snatchers 1978, and The Thing 1982 coming out. Those last two, Body Snatchers and The Thing, they deal really directly with aliens that hide within human beings. They walk among us undetected until it's time to burst out in their nasty, squelchy glory. That's what it all goes back to, baby. Fear of outsiders trying to assimilate into society with you. Mistrust of your fellow man. You know it by now. It's a tale as old as time. They Live by John Carpenter, absolute cinema, by the way, epitomizes this with its plot of a guy who gets hold of sunglasses that allow him to see that a good portion of the human race are actually hideous aliens and that their subliminal messages are hidden everywhere. Extra 1982 is a low-key disgusting little movie about a guy that's abducted by aliens but comes back to Earth via getting birthed. He looks the same as ever but just starts acting all wrong. He drinks blood and eats snake eggs and is generally a bit of a freakazoid. The Brain 1988 is an ever so slightly different take where one big floating brain alien is brainwashing the residents of a town through his weird and clearly Scientology-esque self-help TV show, as opposed to straight up like impersonating them or killing them. The Alien movies I of course will mention because there's no aliens without Alien. They approach it much more with the fear of unknown at the forefront rather than fear of fellow man. It's a classic creature feature take. There's a lot of different installments in that series that I will not lie, I haven't watched all of, but the overarching theme is always humans under attack by horrifying space aliens. Plain and simple. My personal favorite straight up good old fashioned alien horror movie is, and I fear always will be, Jordan Peele's Nope 2022. That has a flying alien that looks like a UFO / giant cowboy hat and often hides behind a cloud other than to swoop down and suck people up into its big hole. That alien, named Jean Jacket, only ever really sucks people up if they look into its eyes or its hole, I guess, which is like fairly understandable. But I love when aliens have random little rules like that, like being allergic to water in M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, or the sunburn covering only half of the face in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That stuff always feels very kind of cosmic and spooky. Spot number 5 goes to folk horror, and this is such a cool one, you guys. As the name suggests, they focus on aspects of folklore when making their scares. They focus often on the old ways, on ancient religious practices and superstitions, and often have quite a rustic countryside aesthetic in rural, isolated towns, featuring lots of beautiful but vaguely dangerous nature. From there on, it can be as specific or as non-specific as a filmmaker really wants. It can dramatize a actual real-life historical event, focusing on one super niche regional folkloric practice, or it can just kind of have the folky vibes. Like the Icelandic movie Lamb, for an example of the latter, that kind of writes its own folktale with a couple who lost their daughter a while ago, discovering a humanoid sort of sheep baby creature in their barn and deciding to raise it as their own, treating it as a kind of do-over at parenting. It's set around Christmas time, which is a kind of staple for any old Icelandic folktales. It's a very spiritually significant time for those, and it's got that stark rural farmland setting for the whole of it. I think any ominous movie with a lamb taking up a lot of its screen time is automatically a folk horror. They're very ethereal creatures, and it brings to mind images of like the the sacrificial lamb and various other lamb-centric traditions from the oldie worldy. Robert Eggers' The Witch keeps its supernatural elements close to its chest, but again, it's so quintessentially folk horror. It's set in early 1600s New England against the backdrop of witch hunting and incredibly bleak but deeply superstitious Puritan way of life. It's about a Puritan family supposedly being screwed with by a witch in the nearby woods, and features folk staples such as a possibly talking goat named Black Phillip, drinking goat blood, and dancing around fires with your boobies out. That is considered like the beacon of modern folk horror, I would say. It encapsulates all of that so well, and definitely follows in the footsteps of classics like Michael Reeves' Witchfinder General 1968. Witchfinder General is indeed based on the real Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins, who's kind of just a brute that enjoyed hurting women, but cashed in on that by framing himself as an expert witch hunter. And he was pretty responsible for like witch hunting and the witch trials and stuff being as big a deal as they were in the 1600s. The movie uses the folk horror aesthetic to examine the brutality of this period. You know, it's not the witches that are frightening in this bad boy, but the guy who's trying to paint them as such. It features, of course, a fantastically menacing performance from Vincent Price as Hopkins, terrorizing suspects of witchcraft, torturing them with needles as a means of locating their devil's mark. Adam Scoville, a writer for the British Film Institute, cites Witchfinder General as kind of a pillar of folk horror, especially in the 60s and 70s. He proposes it's part of the folk horror unholy trinity, which is made up of 3 films: Witchfinder General, The Wicker Man, and The Blood on Satan's Claw, according to Adam Scoville. This is what he put forward. Now, those last 2 movies, Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw, definitely take us right on down to the next niche of folk horror, and I'd say kind of the most popular flavour of folk horror when these films come out, which is cult movies. Movies about small, unassuming countryside villages having a secret, seedy underbelly of satanic groups secretly calling the shots. The Blood on Satan's Claw, for example, sees all the young people in an 18th century town be slowly drawn into a cult worshipping the demon Behemoth, led by local teenager Angel Blake, who inexplicably has such intense iPhone face. Like, this was 1971, but her ass definitely knows what Labubu is. The movie just feels muddy. It feels like mud and tree branches and stinging nettles, as the evils are also wrapped up in the natural world. Luke Beale's article on Medium writes that it implies that there is something rotten at the heart of England, which I absolutely agree with. Both as in, I agree with that quote in regards to the movie, and also that I agree that there is something rotten at the heart of England, because I hate it here. Something this film does that I love is featuring devil's skin, where the overall growing demonic presence in the village causes the locals to grow these little patches of fur randomly on their bodies. Like, just a cute little makeover from Behemoth himself. The Wicker Man is, I think, the archetypal cult folk horror. I don't think any film does or ever has done this shit better than that movie. It follows a policeman rocking up to a lonely isle up in the Hebrides to investigate the disappearance of a little girl there, who soon discovers that the islanders are way into paganism. They are doing exactly what Celtic pagan cultists are expected to do: shagging in open fields and dancing around maypoles, but most disturbingly very much playing dumb about the disappeared little girl and seeming to not want the policeman meddling with it at all. Big spoiler, but not the biggest spoiler of all, and you can kind of see it coming in the film, to be fair, but human sacrifices are going down. I wonder if the title of The Wicker Man would have anything to do with that. I wonder if that's related to the sacrifices at all. The modern day gold standard for cult movies is certainly Ari Aster's Midsummer, which takes things over to Sweden. That's certainly got a lot of whispers of Wicker Man in it. Human sacrifices abound, but in even more painful and bizarre ways, including this odd flaying, hung by skin situation, skin being taken off and worn as masks, the iconic jumping off a cliff and finishing the job with a mallet to the face combo. I think that also plays so much into fear of other cultures. It's very much a fish out of water movie, with the American tourists being immersed in the cultural Swedish practices of the Haga commune. Not a single trace of Americanness or anything they recognize around them. It's also such a lonely movie. You really get that sense of being a million miles away from home and just kind of swallowed up by this foreign landscape. There's again lots of emphasis on the natural world, especially flowers. It manages to make bountiful, colorful bouquets of flowers seem so unnatural and ominous. That is an incredibly scary film in general, although I will bet you didn't need me to tell you that. Folk horror has the potential to get very niche and regional. You know, anywhere there's history and superstitions can become the backdrop for a folk horror nightmare. There's a lot of Japanese horror movies that fit that bill. Many of the absolute Japanese horror cinema classics are folk tales. For example, Onibaba, 1964. Onibaba, or Shinto, are ghostly figures in Japanese spirituality, a kind of yokai, which is the Japanese term for spirits in general, who are believed to be women who are turned into terrifying yokai due to karma for their bad actions. In general, they lurk around deep in the mountains or in caves. Now, the film doesn't feature Onibaba specifically, the mythical creature, but it does feature the idea of monstrous demonic women in a big way and facing up to the consequences of your actions in a supernatural kind of manner. A mother dons a scary, demonic-looking Hanya mask in order to scare her daughter, namely to scare her off from dating this one guy, popping up around the thick, billowing reeds of the Kyoto countryside while wearing it. Only in a twist of fate, the mask gets stuck to her face. And I won't go too specific on the ending, but it's all about her monstrous actions making her actually into a kind of monster. And that actually specifically comes from a Shin Buddhist parable, that story of Onibaba. So folk horror. Other Japanese folk horrors include Kwaidan, an anthology film dedicated to 4 different ghostly Japanese folk tales, and Kuroneko, a folk tale about Onryo, vengeful spirits, taking revenge on the samurai that killed them. I already talked a fair bit about Old English folklore in the cult niche, but I do just want to mention Alex Garland's movie Men. Let it be known, I do not fucking like this movie, okay? I really was so disappointed by it. It was one big he thought he ate, you know? But that does play with the myth of the Green Man. That is a figure that always really freaked me out as a kid, and I was so excited to see it explored in a horror context when I sat down for the movie. Not when I left. The Green Man's origins are kind of widely unknown, but he started appearing in English art and culture and stuff a really, really long time ago, kind of early modern period, and he's sometimes attributed to paganism. It's a man with foliage growing out of his face, and he's, you know, resultantly green. So he can be interpreted as a symbol of fertility or rebirth or abundance. Men, the movie, has the Green Man inscribed on the architecture of a church, which is quite commonly seen. The movie does not do enough with it, which is frustrating, but it definitely plays into the fertility theme, because by the end, don't get too excited, you guys, okay? Do not get too excited. But the Green Man does get pregnant several times. The Hallow 2015 steeps its plot in Irish folklore, seeing a family move to a new house in a remote village encircled by thick forest, rumored to be overrun with pesky fae. Fae, or fairy, are a staple feature of Irish folklore, an ancient supernatural race of spirits descended from the Tuatha De Danann, who are kind of like gods and are said to be the very first inhabitants of Ireland. It also plays with the idea of changelings, which is when fae steal away a human baby and swap that guy with a evil little fairy, which soon becomes an apparent threat for the main family. There's lots of great Scandinavian mythical creatures with horror movies dedicated to them. For example, the 2018 movie Draug, that's about a missionary who goes missing in the endlessly deep northern Sweden forests in the 11th century, and the search party who goes out looking for her but finds something much worse instead. It's based off the Norse creature, the Draug, reanimated corpses of people who are usually kind of bastards in real life too. One of certainly my top folk horrors is The Ritual, based off of Adam Neville's story that also takes place in a huge labyrinthine old growth Swedish forest with terrible things much older than humanity lurking inside. It caters to all your classic folk horror needs, such as English people being absolute fools within foreign cultures they know nothing about, menacing sigils and mysteriously slain animal corpses appearing out of nowhere, and a classic let's just ignore the hiking trail setup to make you punch your TV. It reminds me a lot of the Blair Witch Project, and not in like the Blair Witch ripoff way, but just in its bone deep dread and suffocating sense of despair in the face of these otherworldly forces. Its main antagonist is a Jotun, a Norse troll-like creature said to be an offspring of the god Loki, and it has got to be one of the most terrifying looking modern day creature designs out there. It looks so strange. Spot number 4 goes to Ghosts and Demons, which basic pick? Yes, maybe, but it's my truth. I am pairing ghosts with demons, so kind of just all haunting entities because they really often overlap. A good, simple, pared back ghost story can be so spine-chilling in my opinion, can really just satisfy those spooky itches, especially if you chill the fuck out with the CGI and the screeching violins and everything. It can be so powerful. One country's films seem to have understood this assignment way more than any others, and that is Japan. Japanese ghost and demon movies are so ungodly frightening. I love them. Perhaps my favorite film in this whole category is Cairo or Pulse 2001. It's got a lot of ghostly encounter scenes in it that are considered to be some of the most frightening of all time. That brings a lot of cyber elements into the ghost mythology, having ghosts kind of haunting and traveling through the internet. Most of the ghostly visions our protagonists are exposed to come through computer screens. I think its physical portrayal of ghosts, you know, how they actually look here, is perfect. They leave these thick sooty black patches on the walls and floors where they've been and move like they're deep underwater. So subtle and creepy, they really do feel like dead things. I do think the original Ju-on movies, so The Grudge and The Curse, are still unbelievably scary looking. And I also remember The Grudge 2004, the American remake, getting me pretty damn good with its jump scares as well. Again, I just do think these ghost designs look amazing. The wide eyes and permanent scream, the swampy, straggly hair, the tendency for these ghosts to just appear in the most unassuming places unannounced. It's so simple and perfect. Noroi the Curse 2005 is a found footage take on ghosts, or rather demons, as it follows a demonic entity named Kagutaba and its victims. I find the sounds people touched by Kagutaba make in this really haunting. Again, all very subtle but very nightmarish. The idea of being haunted by a ghost or demon as a kind of curse, one of these entities attaching itself to you, is very prevalent in these films. The Ring movies have their iconic demon attaching itself to people if they watch a creepy David Lynch short film looking videotape that you can only shake off by showing the video to someone else. If not, well, you will die in 7 days, bitch. That's a common rule for these demons and these clingy ghosts, that you can get rid of them, but only by passing them on to someone else. To take this out of early 2000s J-horror examples, we have modern American horror movies like Smile. That has a demon that harasses you with its ugly ass smile. It appears as smiling people everywhere, but scary smiling people. To pass that on, you have to kill yourself in front of another person. That's how it works. Yeah. Draws up a lot of parallels between its demon and kind of losing your mind, going through psychosis or schizophrenia or such like. The first one is literally set in a psych hospital and follows a psychiatrist as its lead. They're decently fun and anxiety inducing, got some good jump scares, but they're not the best movies. It Follows, however, is a genuinely brilliant movie, an all-timer in my opinion. That demon has such a simple concept because it appears as completely regular people. No goofy CGI or overwrought monster acting necessary. It just takes the shape of some guy that follows you. Literally follows you. If it gets you, you know you are fucking toast, but the film mostly just plays with the quiet but huge menace of a slowly, calmly approaching figure just in the distance. That one is sexually transmitted, so you need to boink to pass that one on. Sometimes, however, your ghost or demon is not attached to you via a curse, but it is literally just living in you. It's inside you. It's not clinging on, it's living rent-free. I mentioned before that I really don't hugely care for like possession, exorcism type movies, so that's not entirely what I'm talking about here. Movies that are less operating in the specific confines of Satan inside human must remove with holy water. They often get a little bit more out of the box and a little bit more creative with their human dwelling entities. Like, for example, Talk to Me 2022. I'm still so impressed with that movie. It has a mysterious embalmed hand that when you grab hold of it and say, I let you in, a ghost can hop inside you and say its piece, do its thing for a short period of time. Choosing to let a ghost in is shown to bring about a kind of ecstasy. It has like a drug-like effect on the person afterwards. And so in the film we see it used by teenagers as a kind of party game. They have little consensual possession parties for fun, until it all goes horribly wrong, of course. Then no one is having very much fun. That's directed by the Filippo brothers, and they do have another film that just came out this year, Bring Her Back. Also amazing and unnerving as hell, and deeply heartbreaking, I found. Spoilers, huge spoilers. I'm trying to be better with spoilers, but that sees someone willingly putting a demon in another person, a child in fact, as part of a strange kind of amateur resurrection ritual. A super popular niche of ghosts and demons, one that is getting more and more popular by the second in fact, is the metaphorical ghost story. Movies that cast heavy doubt over their own supernatural qualities and their ghoulish ghostly entities. You know, they invite you to be afraid, but they also invite you to question, what else could this be? Is it a manifestation of something the characters are going through mentally perhaps? Which that can be very annoying, but I've seen it done well, especially in older movies. The OG being The Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House novel. Did you know we were originally meant to get a Steven Spielberg x Stephen King collab adaptation of this story? Did you fucking know that? It's about 4 people staying in a haunted house. Dr. Markway, as he's called in the film, has randomers Luke, Theodora, and Nell stay in Hill House with them to run a paranormal investigation there, see what they all sense and experience. Nell in particular seems to experience the most, but we get more and more of a sense that it's kind of just her coming undone. She's a really repressed person, has been a full-time carer for her dying mum for the past few years, and really has no sense of who she is or what she really wants until she finds Hill House. It's so ugly and off-putting, but she unwittingly falls in love with it. She's kind of being drawn in to become one of the ghosts that walk its walls. So it's all heavily up to interpretation what the true source of that is. Is it feeding off her? Is she feeding off it? You know? It's not only me that loves that story. That old guy, Stephen King, loves it as well. And it was kind of the big, huge, fat, large inspiration behind his masterpiece, The Shining. Now, I've got a full hour-long video essay on the differences between Kubrick's movie and King's original novel. So go watch that for more deets. I will say in Kubrick's adaptation, more than any other, we are forever unsure about whether the evils at play are internal or external. We follow Jack Torrance and his wife and kid staying in the imposing snow-stranded Overlook Hotel over the winter for his new job as caretaker there, and all members of the family pretty quickly start having terrifying visions and auditory hallucinations and noticing deeply odd things about the hotel. It's left up to us to determine whether that's because the hotel is haunted by its shady, odd history, or if it's all a manifestation of Jack, barely recovering alcoholic with anger issues he's desperately trying to stop taking out on his family, going off the deep end with cabin fever. One of the honest to God greatest films ever made. Nightmare fuel still to this day in its surreality and loneliness, and I really think the uncertainty makes it so much scarier. It doesn't cheapen it in the way a lot of all in his head media can do. Ghosts and demons are obviously often used as grief metaphors. I and many others are sick to the back teeth of grief metaphors in horror, but there are still a few bangers that fit this bill, namely back from when grief horror was still kind of fresh and funky. There's The Babadook, for example, a soul-crushingly depressing look at a sinister children's book character coming to life and haunting a mother and her son after the loss of her husband. Add Lake Mungo, an even soul-crushingly depressing look at a family seemingly capturing their recently drowned teenage daughter's ghost on camera. The latter also plays with the idea of doppelgangers as ghosts or demons too, exploring the notion that you can see the ghost of yourself while you're still alive. And it may or may not mean you are fucking doomed. Spot number three goes to cosmic horror. Cosmic horror is pretty hard to define in a quick and easy manner because its whole kind of shtick is that it's horrors beyond one's comprehension, horror beyond description. Its core principle is that the human race is an absolutely teeny tiny speck of dust in comparison to this ancient, multitudinous universe that we live in, and that there are species and dimensions and laws of physics we could never possibly come close to understanding because we're not worthy, we were never meant to, we are minute in comparison to it all. You can't talk about cosmic horror without talking about H.P. Lovecraft. Horrible racist individual, but his stories are very, very frightening and intriguing. His works form the base kind of inspo, the mold for almost all cosmic horror out there these days. For example, The Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness, both being based around the discoveries of the great old ones. Giant and older than time itself, cosmic deities that would just wipe out our minds and bodies and everything we know should they rise again. I realized while writing this that a really common theme and the things that genuinely scare me are things that are really old. I guess that's the way to get under my skin, is just get real ancient. You've got Cthulhu, of course, a great big octopus dragon thing covered in his trademark tentacles. Shoggoth, an amorphous colossal amoeba floating around. There's the ominously titled deep ones who lurk around under the ocean. There's gazillions of these guys. And it's very common practice for any of Lovecraft's human characters who discover these things to lose their minds because they just can't comprehend them. They were never built to. You get the vibe. Many of Lovecraft's creatures and similarly Lovecraftian cosmic horror creatures have made it to screen. The Dunwich Horror 1970, for example, is an adaptation of his 1928 novella of the same name, documenting what happens when one of his trademark giant godlike beasts, the all-knowing Yog-Sothoth, impregnates a human woman, his offspring being the pretty normal-looking Dean Stockwell and his much less normal-looking twin. The Shudder movie Glorious, released in 2022, brings a kind of modern twist to the Lovecraft mythos, seeing a down-on-his-luck guy just broken up with his girlfriend and getting stuck in the bathroom stall he goes to puke in, with the demonic deity Gitana-Thoa in the stall next to him. The Void 2016 follows in these cosmic footsteps big time, using classic Lovecraftian archetypes like shape-shifting tentacled nightmare creatures, portals to hell, and a robed cult worshipping them as a little cherry on top. That has a setup where the mere mortal humans are stuck in a hospital against all of this, so definitely emphasizing the insignificance and powerlessness of human beings against these cosmic threats. Stepping away from Lovecraft, I really love The Lair of the White Worm, based on Bram Stoker's story of the same name. And I would say its titular ancient white worm that wriggles through caves under Derbyshire would fit right into the list of Cthulhu mythos deities. Spoilers for Possession 1980. Spoilers, but I would say that the worm tentacle thing that Anna is fucking in that movie is kind of a classic cosmic monster. She starts having an affair with this little guy and also just generally mentally unraveling, which is quite in keeping with how anyone touched by cosmic entities tends to act. That uses its monster as a kind of metaphor for Anna's nervous breakdown she's going through as well. Other than strange creatures and beasts, the concept of parallel dimensions that completely peel back our concept of reality and what is right and normal is a big part of cosmic horror, and there are many cosmic horror films that delve into that in a deliciously frightening way. Although none of it is explicitly cosmic, I would say a lot of David Lynch's stuff kind of carries this alternate dimension vibe, especially like in Twin Peaks, like with all his Black Lodge stuff. He perfectly creates the feel of this totally alien, totally other reality with everyone speaking backwards and just kind of acting Lynchian, you know? Clive Barker's Hellraiser is a perfect example of this. You all know how I feel about Hellraiser by now, for sure. That centers on a whole other realm that can be accessed if you solve a little puzzle cube, full of pleasures and pains beyond human comprehension. I also really like that said pleasures and pains beyond human comprehension are just kind of BDSM in the story. Like, that's what lies beyond the limits of all human understanding. It's BDSM, just like piercing play. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness tackles the cosmic parallel dimension head on. This movie has such a heavy feeling of eldritch wrongness permeating it that is just perfect for cosmic horror. I love it. This is actually one of my top Carpenter movies. I don't know if that's unpopular or not, but it's about a very obviously Lovecraft-inspired horror author, Sutter Kane, who goes missing and the investigator assigned to find him. His search leads him into a strange, sinister dimension where all of Kane's stories and characters are real. Specifically, all the events that occur in Kane's newest novel are happening in real life, in real time. And so obviously he starts kind of losing his mind. There's some brilliant otherworldly weirdness here with obligatory mentions of serving the old ones and just a super eerie interdimensional journey. I love how they enter the Sutter Kane verse by driving down this seemingly endless road at night, passing the same cyclist over and over again who seems to be years older every time we see him. Like, it's so strange, so fucking good. A less obvious pick for parallel dimension themed cosmic horror, I would say, is Vivarium 2020. I am a huge defender for that movie. I find it to be legitimately horrifying, and it did my mood in lockdown when I watched it absolutely zero favors. So it's my friend. That's actually my friend. That has a young couple looking to move out and going to a house viewing. Only once they get to the completely empty housing estate, they find they can never leave. After a few days of just suffering in this infinite new build hell, they're just given a boy to raise. He's literally just dropped off at their door and they have to raise him. We definitely get the impression this boy is a little bit eldritch. He's not quite human. He ages at an unnaturally fast rate and stays up all night watching meaningless smushy symbols broadcast on the TV. I love the way this movie uses the incomprehensible, the idea of being stuck for infinity and going insane in an uncanny, completely unearth-like place as a way to talk about the mundane. The whole thing makes a statement about the horrors of settling down, getting married and having kids, living quietly in the suburbs. And I think using these really big cosmic conventions to do that is super cool and effective. Lastly, a great niche of cosmic horror is Guy Loses His Mind movies. All about expanding the mind beyond its limits and the dangers of learning things we were never meant to. I think this might kind of be my favorite cosmic horror niche just because the loss of one's mind is something that translates so easily, so well to screen, and like it takes a little to do a lot, you know. You don't have to do too much for this shit to be really scary and really effective. Movies like From Beyond 1985 and Altered States 1980 examine this in a scientific context, having scientists experiment with expanding the mind and opening it up to new realities, but accidentally stumbling upon some very unscientific and beyond humanity discoveries. They both also talk about how once your brain goes in these cosmic matters, your body usually kind of turns to mush as well. In Altered States, people are literally de-evolving until they're mere little energetic wisps. And From Beyond has great fun with some strange, sludgy body horror. There's movies with no experimentation involved specifically, though. There's many where people are just in the wrong place at the wrong time and have their sanity cracked open like an egg. For example, The Outwaters has a group of people camping out in the Mojave Desert to film a music video, but they seem to have happened upon a kind of cosmic hotspot there, as they all start experiencing crazy hallucinatory shit right away. Although they're definitely not hallucinating because this is a found footage movie, so it would appear that the laws of time and place really have just ceased to exist for these guys in the most hellish ways. The Color Out of Space is another really fantastic Lovecraft adaptation about losing your mind. It was adapted in 1963 and then again in 1987, but I do really love the 2019 one. They had Colin Stetson on the soundtrack, so you know they meant business. It plays with the endlessly cool and freaky concept of a color that humans have never seen before, namely a meteor that crashes to Earth all glowing in this color. Reality starts to melt at high speeds around this meteor, and we see that mostly through the eyes of the regular old gardener family. I also think Junji Ito's Uzumaki might just count as cosmic, and that would definitely come close to rivaling my love of Color Out of Space. That might be my top rec here. And that sees the residents of a small Japanese town becoming mysteriously obsessed with the shape of a spiral. These guys, they start spiraling. I think the reason this is such a scary subgenre for me is because, like, they always say that nothing in a movie, in a story, in a book is ever going to be as scary as your imagination, right? And because cosmic horror's whole thing is built on like being beyond your imagination. It's horror beyond anything you can comprehend, and like I feel like that's kind of like a challenge for your imagination, right? It's up to you to make any sense of it whatsoever. It's up to you to draw those conclusions, and whatever conclusion you come to is usually pretty fucking horrifying. Spot number 2 goes to psychological horror, and because that's often used as a very broad catch-all, I just want to like specify that what I'm talking about here is specifically non-supernatural stuff that is purely psychological warfare. The events may get cartoonishly, ridiculously bad for our characters, but they can never like stray too far outside the realm of reality. People are really at the heart of the scares here, you know, the twisted, fucked up things that just plain old people do to each other, displayed for us with no holds barred. The story I'll always kind of come back to as the quintessential perfect psychological horror is Stephen King's Misery. And I will say I was a lot more viscerally affected by the book, but the film is very squirmy as well. That's where a popular author gets into a car accident and is rescued by a woman who just so happens to be his #1 fan. She takes him back to her isolated, snowy home and looks after him as he's healing. Things pretty quickly go south because this woman, Annie, is batshit insane, and her parasocial relationship with his writing has her doing the craziest things to him. He is badly injured from the car wreck the entire time, obviously, so he is totally immobile and at her mercy. We see him try to escape, try to butter her up, give up, be tortured, try to call for help, and it's all nerve-shredding. The idea of being at someone unpredictable and possibly violent's mercy is a really prevalent theme here, often in a kidnapping scenario. Funny Games, for example, one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen still to this day, has teenage boys taking a family hostage and just stripping back every layer of sanity in their brains for funsies and recreation. What makes this and so many other psych horror films so unnerving is the convolution of the torture they inflict on this family. It's never just straightforward, guns are blazing a la Saw. It's all an excruciating mindfuck. Stripping them, making them guess and bet on what's gonna happen to them, giving them a little bit of hope and then snatching it away again. Films like The Loved Ones and Audition follow a little more in Misery's footsteps, with their tales of scorned women gone off the rails, taking acupuncture needles to their beaux' eyes and power drills to their heads and DIY lobotomy attempts respectively. I think The Loved Ones skews a little bit more outwardly graphically violent than the others. So much intense pain is inflicted on the poor dude kidnapped in this. But I really didn't care for like the main kidnapping diva, Lola. I didn't really care for her performance. The premise is that of an unpopular girl who kidnaps the boy who declines her prom invite and shows him a horrific prom of her own, which should have been so aggressively up my alley. But I don't know, she played it kind of hammy, and like I wasn't really into it, to be honest. Need more Annie Wilkes vibes. Maybe I'm just too Annie pilled to live. The Austrian film Goodnight Mummy is a kind of double-edged psychological sword. You get 2 horrible mindfuck scenarios in one, and this is certainly a spoiler, so skip if you need to. But it starts out with 2 twin brothers' mum coming home from plastic surgery with her head all covered in bandages, so they can't see her face, and they begin to notice she seems ever so slightly off. Colder, crueler than before. She needs the blind shut all day and demands absolute silence all the time. So the boys become convinced she's an intruder only pretending to be their mother. In comes the secondary psychological nightmare plot of the movie, which is where we learn she's certainly not an intruder, but the boys are still convinced and just start torturing the hell out of their mum. The fact they're so young somehow only makes their torture of her worse, because like their childish kind of irrational methods are actually way more horrific. For example, like super gluing their mum's lips shut. They do a lot with super glue, actually. There's more twists and turns in that story, but I will let you experience them for yourself. There's an American remake as well, which I seem to remember is pretty fine. It's pretty faithful, so take your pick. And I will also just mention The House That Jack Built by Lars von Trier. That takes a kind of different look on the human evil trope and puts us in said human evil's shoes. We follow a deeply sadistic serial killer as our protagonist, kind of viewing a retrospective portfolio of his horrible work as he's descending into hell. We're kind of getting a little best bits comp. It's a simple but really, really effective setup. There's a lot of scenes I will never forget in this. The hunting scene being one of them. He forces a woman to have a picnic with her dead kids that he just killed, and yeah, it's framed in the most terrifying and uncomfortable way. Losing one's mind is a big thing in psychological horror as well, albeit in a much more kind of everyday way than in cosmic horror. Usually it kind of takes the everyday anxieties that we as people feel and blows them up to ridiculous and impossibly stressful new heights as we helplessly watch someone completely crumble under pressure and usually ruin everything in the process, or at least have it ruined for them. Coffee Table immediately comes to mind here. I heavily recommend going in blind to this one, so I will give you a sec to scramble away. If you want to skip, go away. It starts out with very low level tension, with new parents Jesus and Maria arguing over whether their new glass coffee table is fugly or not. Jesus is a big advocate for the table. He loves that fucking thing, and he doesn't exactly follow the assembly instructions very well, and while he's carrying his newborn baby son, trips over it with the table's glass sheet surface immediately decapitating the baby. If that alone isn't day ruining enough, in some uber dissociated trauma haze, he opts not to tell his wife or their guests coming round later that day. He takes a kind of out of sight, out of mind approach to his headless boy. Watching him run around all day looking visibly broken and desperately trying to hide the blood-soaked cot or the discarded baby skull under the sofa is bound to give you like 3 new mental illnesses. Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan is essential loss of mind media. And generally it's a topic Aronofsky is very interested in and portrays in beautiful, nauseating glory. So any of his movies are kind of a good pick for this vibe. That one though is about a walking anal retention ballerina who wants the lead role in her ballet group's Swan Lake production, but she isn't really the right fit for the Black Swan role requirements. The character needs to be sensual, edgy, a little bit unpredictable, and as I mentioned, our lead, Nina, is a walking anal retention. She's a big time Virgo. Her desperation and consistent failure to get this one role, master this one thing she isn't instantly perfect at for the first time, drives her absolutely insane, and she actually kind of starts morphing into the Black Swan in her desperate attempts. The line between fact and delusion gets so thin that she starts semi-transforming into a bird at some points. And she also low-key gets like really gay. Censor is another bitches losing it at work movie, following a woman working for the BBFC in the 80s, cutting anything too violent or sexual from films before they're released. However, when she recognizes an actress in one of the obscure or video nasties she's working on censoring, specifically she thinks it might be her long missing sister, she starts to majorly unravel and things get rather psychedelic. Just like Nina in Black Swan and Bev in Dead Ringers, she is a real perfectionist who never puts a toe out of line before this, making her downfall that much greater, you know? This is a movie that should have worked for me more than it did. I absolutely love anything to do with the video nasty controversy and movies about movies in general, but it's a little bit lackluster in my opinion. Amazing for a directorial debut though. I have nothing bad to say about how it was like technically made or anything. Very nice, neat little movie. It just wasn't super impactful for me personally, which was a surprise. We made it to spot number 1. And when I say we, I mean me. We made it, baby. The most terrifying subgenre in horror, officially trademark, goes to body horror. Woo! Woo! Give it up for perversions of the flesh. And for once, all is harmonious on Planet Catzilla, because this is not only the one I'm the most scared of, but it's also the subgenre I like the most. So I am both terrified and obsessed with this stuff. It is, of course, all about the human body as a source of horror. Bodies becoming warped and mutated and breaking down, the pinnacle of what is natural becoming unnatural. Your most standard setup for this, of course, is one character does something to another character's body against their will. Makes some physical alteration to it, like a body modification, except You did not book an appointment, you did not ask for it, you did not pay for it, and it is in a manner which is horrifying to you. Which, it's almost like that's American Mary's entire plot. About a med school dropout turned shady back alley body mod surgeon who gets revenge on her rapist ex-professor using her specific skill set. You know when everyone like wanted to split their tongue in middle school? American Mary is doing that shit to this guy whether he likes it or not. She's mutilating his genitals, amputating whatever she feels like, hanging him up like a piece of meat. It's a very kind of inspiring and feel-good movie. If you take that and elevate it to ever more absurd heights, you get Kevin Smith's Tusk. That has Justin Long traveling in Canada to get content for his podcast, immediately terrifying, and being kidnapped by a demented walrus lover named Howard Howe, who dabbles in walrus-related surgical procedures. He uses random bits of amputated bone and flesh from Justin Long. Cannot remember his character name, so he's just Justin Long as himself now, along with a custom sewn walrus suit to transform him into a walrus creature. When I was a little bit younger, this was just about the most terrifying body horror concept I could possibly imagine, and I was really scared of the final walrus bitch appearance. It's a pretty goofy watch in actuality. A fair bit of it is played for comedy that I will say is not very funny. Johnny Depp. But it does encapsulate a lot of what makes this subgenre so terrifying. Complete loss of control, not being able to recognize yourself in even the most basic essential ways. I think it has a lot to say about emasculation as well, especially by setting up our lead as such a dick swinging faux macho right-wing boy to start with. You know, how are you going to be the alpha male when you're actually a walrus who swims and eats fish all day? Other than films where we see these horrors actually inflicted, like where we see one character strapping another down and desecrating their corporeal form. Ew, sorry. Other than that is the niche of the mysterious body horror, where a character's body is completely fine and good and healthy until one day it's not. It becomes fucked up out of the blue. I think this is the most relatable and thus most terrifying brand of body horror. You know, everyone's had something like that. Everyone's developed like a new mole or something. Drop your mole pics below right now. Movies like The Incredible Melting Man promise this, but do not quite deliver. I'm looking at it's 7% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. That's where the lead is an astronaut who discovers his body is mysteriously melting off of his bones after getting blasted with radiation on an expedition to the planet Saturn. It should be terrifying. Is mostly really fucking goofy. Tetsuo the Iron Man, however, is kind of the king of this, with a guy truly just waking up one day to find his body is turning into metal. He nicks his cheek shaving one day and finds a little metal growing out of it, and the next thing he knows, his entire penis is a lethal metal drill. This movie has a real psychosexual flair to it, which is really interesting. A conscious juxtaposition on the director's part of like hard cold iron and soft intimate flesh. Our titular Iron Man has constant metal themed sex dreams, and of course the image of his drill peen is starkly sexual. Introducing the theme of sexuality to body horror I think makes for some really compelling and really uncomfortable stories. I think they work together like a charm. You know, it all goes back to the body being something with functions and urges that are often so alien and even frightening to its inhabitant. Brian Yuzna's Society, a movie I have historically never been able to shut the fuck up about, that has a really famous, really striking body horror orgy final scene. Designed absolutely disgustingly and perfectly by Screaming Mad George, the titular society of people all get together and morph and melt their extremities into each other in a way that is just shown to us as so perverse. It's so visibly sweaty and seedy and violent. David Cronenberg's kind of entire ethos as a director lies with psychosexual body horror. All of his best movies, in my opinion, totally hinge on that. Videodrome, for example, looks at like porn and snuff and all manner of taboo, unsavory filmmaking with a sleazy kind of BDSM themed channel called Videodrome that actually has a supernatural effect on its viewers, melting their minds and their flesh in time. The lead, Max, undergoes these Videodrome monstrosities. The hallucinations he starts experiencing include, but are not limited to, a makeout session with his breathing, curvaceous TV set and all sorts of red room, whips and chains type scenarios, including his missing bae and his boss and stuff. His mutations are even more on the nose as he develops a VCR slot on his stomach, or as it's most commonly referred to, a vagina. Congrats on your bottom surgery, king. Cronenberg's less erotic but all the more heartbreaking and nasty, in my opinion, is his iconic 1986 take on The Fly. The 58 version of that movie is a little schlockier, a little more classic creature feature, whereas Cronenberg's feels much more grounded, and although the plot is, yes, about a man turning into a fly, it feels much more akin to watching a man succumb to some devastating disease like AIDS or leprosy. Dr. Seth Brundle is a bit of a mad scientist, and he's come up with the groundbreaking invention of a teleportation device, or a telepod. Only when he tests it out, he does not realize a fly was stuck in the pod with him. And in the teleportation process, he and said fly's DNA is now fused. We watch him become insectile in a nice, slow, slimy decline, watching him lose his teeth and fingernails and even ears, and his personality go from gentle and bumbling to pretty manic. This really nails the slow transformation that I think is key to really gnarly body horror. You know, where's the fun in watching a guy just turn into goo over the course of one scene? I need to see his body and life crumble into ruins in a slow, torturous spiral to be truly disturbed, you know? The Fly also dangles a little bit of pregnancy body horror over our heads as well, after Seth Brundle's bae, Veronica, realizes he's a fly man at the same time as realizing she's pregnant with his baby. Cue the classic fly maggot labor nightmare sequence. Pregnancy sort of forms its own niche in body horror because it's quite an intense, painful, and sometimes unpredictable thing for a person's body to go through in the real world. I feel like most pregnant people's worst fears are always that something is wrong with a pregnancy, something is not quite right or is going wrong in some way, you know, them or their baby is going to get hurt in the process. A common way horror filmmakers kind of play on that anxiety is by whacking out a good old-fashioned pregnant with a monster plot. Lots of trashy 90s junk food horror has its sights set on this, and it's low-key a kind of guilty pleasure of mine. For example, The Unborn, 1991, and The Suckling both follow pregnant women with parasitic little demon babies growing inside of them. For some reason, both of them have fetuses running around looking like the aliens from the Tommyknockers. Then there is the modern pregnancy horror benchmark in Juliette Ducournau's Tita, a French movie about a woman who had sex with a car and is now suffering through a strange kind of metal pregnancy with a little car baby. She bleeds oil out of her vagina, and as we get towards the end, there are little scraps of metal poking out of her belly. Honestly, the metalness of it all is not the most horrifying thing about this pregnancy portrayal to me, because our lead is pretending to be a teenage boy for the majority of this movie. There's a lot of backstory there. That means she is strapping down her pregnant belly every day with bandages. Every day while being heavily pregnant and in immense pain. Some body horror takes on pregnancy that I love, which is to say I hate because they're disgusting, are David Cronenberg's The Brood, the most batshit metaphor for motherhood and trauma, where a character has babies growing on the outside of her as opposed to the inside. They're like little tumors on her torso. And also Old, 2021, which, walk with me here. That movie is my biggest guilty pleasure. I heart the beach that makes you old. I heart the beach that makes you old. And it does have a pretty horrific sequence where a girl gets pregnant, but because she does so on the beach that makes you old, the pregnancy happens at a highly accelerated rate. The girl was also only like 2 years old when she got to the beach, so she's also like mentally a baby while having a baby, and the baby instantly dies because you can't possibly keep the baby fed and healthy and warm while time is moving in this strange beach manner. Yeah, that is very rough to watch. I really love how much can be said with body horror. You know, it can make its viewers wither up inside and recoil and feel so nauseous, but also change their minds on a lot of hard-hitting kind of topics, as any truly, truly good piece of horror media should. For example, body horror often makes statements about beauty standards. It's easy to see how disgusting, oozing bodies with new limbs springing out of them and crunching, warping bones are the polar opposite of the lean, clean, beautiful bodies expected of respectable citizens, especially for women. Coralie Fajar's The Substance, for example, is very much the fly if instead of experimenting with telepods, Seth Brundle was injecting Botox. It sees a revolutionary new cosmetic procedure called The Substance, where you can inject some good old-fashioned green goo that will allow you to live as a younger, more physically perfect version of yourself every 7 days. So you birth like your perfect Sona out of this big gross slit in your back, and through some body swapping mechanics you do a 7 days on, 7 days off with your consciousness. However, if you are lax in any way with your body swapping, for example you don't follow the injection instructions correctly or exist in one body for too long, it has devastating physical side effects. And yes, things go dramatically wrong enough times for Demi Moore to end up looking like Nosferatu with oblong boobies. I already covered the ugly stepsister pretty extensively in the dark fantasy section of this video, but all the barbaric torture-like depictions of cosmetic procedures in that are such obvious and fantastic commentary on the beauty industry and beauty standards in general. Elvira being so desperate to be beautiful, she's letting someone shove needles into her waterline and letting giant vicious insects live inside her stomach is so horrifying, but also rings very true on some level.
And I think there's also something to be said about the fact that in both of these movies, both of these women actually end up, despite their efforts, being even more conventionally ugly. They end up monstrous at the end. And I think that's saying something about you can try so hard to be perfect and become so perfect that it's actually grotesque, you know.
Teeth 2007 looks at this in a specifically sexual context, you know, body horror and desirability, the pressures on women to be sexually attractive to men depicted in this grotesque, heightened way. It is about the vagina dentata myth, a cautionary folktale, been around throughout history, about wicked women with big, sharp teeth in their vaginas that they use to seduce and kill dudes. Only this movie gives that mythological power to a staunchly conservative, no sex before marriage teenage girl, a frequenter of her high school's chastity club, who finally gives in and breaks her rule of abstinence to, of course, a horrible toothy surprise. It's almost like there are such high standards for women that when they're deemed undesirable in any way, they're made to feel like monsters. I almost kind of get that vibe. It's not just women though. Stephen King's Thinner, I think, has some pretty good things to say with its body horror, albeit through a very poorly aged Romani curse plotline. I do believe King was originally trying to make like an anti-racist statement with this story, making the racist, arrogant white dudes get their curse-induced comeuppance. You know, I'm not coming at this with bad faith, but it must be said, its handling does make for quite a rough watch and read. That was a bad book.
The curse of the white man from town.
The body horror that the lead, Billy, goes through is kind of a reverse of what feminine body horror stories often depict. While the best thing a woman can be is small and dainty and petite and barely there, it's the worst thing for a powerful macho man. And that's exactly what happens here as he's cursed to uncontrollably lose weight. It's not depicted so much in the film, but in the book there's some really nasty little anecdotes about various other racists that get cursed. One being slowly turned into a crocodile with his skin getting more and more leathery and scale-like every day, until it's happening inside his throat too, and he has to go live in a tank. And another getting covered head to toe in giant zits and boils. Finally, I do just want to give some love and time to body horror explorations of transness. I know I joked before about the Videodrome bottom surgery, but trans allegories in body horror are actually very prescient and very powerful. Someone's body suddenly presenting a different wrong sex, for example like men with big old bazonkas, is a common trope in these movies.
I've got a chick's body.
It's often played for comedic value, or worse, with a straight up transphobic message, but intentionally or not, they also sometimes end up capturing the trans experience pretty damn well. Because yes, your body and your inner self being completely opposite genders and getting all mixed up in that way does sound like a distressing nightmare. And that is exactly what trans people spend such a formative big chunk of their lives going through. Obviously, I am a cisgender person. I'm not gonna attempt to tell you whether this stuff is all good or not. Just that is very much there, you know. But for what it's worth, I find it to be a heavily mixed bag. You know, movies like Pedro Almodovar's The Skin I Live In, for example, where a male character is forcibly plastic surgeryed and forced to live in captivity as a woman, that always just rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. The trans element is used as more of a twist and a shock than unpacked in any interesting or sensitive way. On the other hand, Jane Schoenbrun's I Saw the TV Glow uses a sprinkling of body horror to look at transness in a way that feels really real and fresh. It's very surreal and nothing is like stated in that movie, but it's more or less obvious that one of the characters is a very closeted, very repressed trans woman or trans femme person. And the scene where their torso is just like opening up and coming apart in the middle of a shift at work speaks volumes about coming to terms with that identity. And that makes sense because that director, Jane Schoenbrun, is trans femme. And so there you have it. Those are the most terrifying, well, those are all the horror subgenres in order of terrifyingness. I hope we agreed on some things, even if we didn't, that you enjoyed hearing a little bit of a different perspective, or you learned something about maybe some subgenres you weren't so familiar with. Hopefully my next video should be a much quicker turnaround because this was a big fat commitment, and the next video should be a little bit quicker and breezier. And in the meantime, until the next video, what are you guys watching? What have you been reading? I am currently reading Needful Things by Stephen King, and it is doing wonders for my autumnal spirit. It's set at like literally this exact time of year, like very early autumn, and I'm loving it so much. It's been like a good year since, no, not a year, it's been a good few months since I've read anything King, so it's really nice to, it's like coming home, you know. And for watching, I just recently rewatched all of Brand New Cherry Flavor on Netflix. Obviously it came out a few years ago, but it's incredibly underrated and so very good, so very good. And I trust you guys' taste that you will actually also really appreciate that show. So that's a little rec from me. Get on that shit if you haven't been on it. Let me know what's you guys' vibe. What have you been consuming? Bye!